Good morning, everyone. So excited to have you all here with us today for day 2 of the 2021 Student Advocates Conference. Very excited to have you all here. We had a terrific day yesterday, tons of presentations, a great opening keynote with our Commissioner, Teresa Levers, and Jason Bierce of the Chamber of Commerce. Really enjoyed sitting in some sessions yesterday. Just so happy to be here and hear from all of you as our state's advocates for students. You know, this conference wouldn't be possible without the annual support of Strada Education Network, and we're so happy to have Shantae Eldridge here with us this morning to share a little bit about her work as the Vice President of Communications, Equity, and Outreach. So without further ado, Shantae, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Liz. And good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. And I hope you are having a fantastic session thus far. So as Liz had mentioned, Strada Education Network is very proud and pleased to be a longtime supporter of the Student Advocate Conference. And so one thing that I thought was really important is we spend a little time together. And it's, of course, it's always fun when you're doing this virtually, but I thought, well, we're here with probably 200-300, maybe even 700 of our closest friends. So I thought I'd just spend a little time talking a little bit around from helping all students succeed beyond completion, and really kind of looking at it through the lens of a social justice framework, really around ally to accomplice. While this isn't a diversity, equity, and inclusion presentation, I really started to fall in love with the words allyship, advocate, and accomplice, really thinking about the work that everyone on this call does in your role as a student advocate. So here's what I'm going to share. We're not going to really go into the theory around allyship and social justice. We are going to talk a little bit around some of Strada's work with our public viewpoint, with my colleagues in our research department. So it will have a little bit of data. We'll talk a little bit about the hearts, and then we'll really focus on now what can we and what should we do. And I have a couple of questions that I would really love for everyone to join in on the chat and just share a little. Right, so one thing that I firmly believe is autobiography is theory. And when we think about who we are and what we bring to the workplace and what we bring to the conversation in post-secondary education and higher ed, and in the idea around really creating a sense of belonging and bringing your true and authentic self to work when we have those opportunities. Autobiographies theory is a conversation that I had recently with Miriam Acevedo Davis, who is the executive director and CEO of La Plaza here in Indianapolis. And we were talking about student success and what does that look like for the Latinx community. And she made this statement that I just thought, it's so true, which around autobiography is theory. So let me share a little bit, because often when you have a presentation, the introduction is filled with a wonderful 500-word bio, and people usually fall asleep. So one thing, let's talk a little bit about who I am and how I ended up sitting here with you all today. So in 1979, vocalist Minnie Riperton, she had this song called Back Down Memory Lane. And so while I was just a wee girl, barely out of diapers and kind of running around the block, I really started thinking about the journey from here today. And so when I started college, I was a continuing generation student, and my initial plan was to become an economist. And I sat in macroeconomics, and I think it was around week 3, I fell asleep. And I thought, this is not promising. And then I remember going on to microeconomics paired with the information systems major. And it's like, oh, I believe the financial outcomes will be beneficial. I'm not sure about how this really aligns with the core of my heart and the mission that I'd like to accomplish one day in the world. So I remember walking around campus, and there was a student employment opportunity in the academic advising assessment and student support center at Metro State College in Denver. It was a no-need work study position, 15 to 20 hours a week. And I thought, this is absolutely fantastic. So I applied for the job and ended up working in that role for right around 4 years, and then had the opportunity to participate in the NASPA undergraduate fellowship program, where I really had a wonderful rotational experience, mentored by the vice president of student affairs, had an opportunity to work very closely with the president of the university, as well as the provost of academic affairs and the deans for the School of Letters, Arts, and Sciences. So my journey as an undergraduate student and working as a peer advisor, thinking about the courses. Of course, as a student, you understand which professors have the different types of personality and balance with different schedules. And Metropolitan State University is an urban institution in Denver, Colorado. And at the time, I think there was roughly around 23,000 students, primarily working adults. So as a traditional age student, surrounded by students and peers that were in the workforce, educators that were practitioners and theorists, had a very rich undergraduate experience. And then being introduced to this world of higher education and thinking like, this is something I can do as a career. I mean, I hadn't thought about it because for me, I understood there were professors, but I really didn't understand what that meant to work in student affairs. And that was my first introduction into perhaps what might be my life plan. So after the undergraduate fellowship, I had an opportunity to serve as an assistant registrar for two small institutions in Denver. And here's what I learned. One, I'm a people person. Two, I respect data and I respect registration and the process. But the window was separating me from having the impact and the mission that I'd like to have. So I transitioned from higher ed and took this really interesting detour into public affairs and worked in state government, both in Colorado and Indiana. But in the heart of my heart, I knew that higher ed was a place that I wanted to be. I wanted to be in higher ed because I was able to see what I could be through the mentorship, the support, and quite frankly, at a very young age, understanding the role of advocacy. When I truly believe that student affairs professionals are just a glimpse of what angels look like on campus, because there is mothering, fathering, sistering, brothering, all of those different things to create those support systems. So I spent 10 years working in the private sector and had an opportunity to work in learning and development for a large pharmaceutical company in Indianapolis, and then for 10 years as both a communications and stakeholder relations professional. And then finally, as I spent 5 years over learning and development. And one of the reasons why I was selected in the role is because the vice president at the time said, the engineers seem to like you and they listen. There was jokingly that I was fluent in engineering. But basically, I was like, I really understand that people ultimately want to be seen and heard. So I spent time working in learning and development, thinking about the core competencies to help elevate someone's career, had an opportunity to work with internships. So I spent time in learning and development, and then the heart to go back to higher ed was still burning. And at this time at the energy organization that I was working for, I started working on a master's degree in organizational leadership and ended up working at the NCAA, overseeing a program called After the Game. And that program really was to take a look at how do we prepare student athletes for life after the game, when just around 75% of all student athletes eventually believe that they're going to go pro. So it's how do you talk about the competencies that you learn in competition that are marketable to the workplace? Understanding that work experiences and internships were really hard to come by when you're balancing athletics and academics. So that's just a little bit about my background and how I ended up in this role. And then something was still edging me on, and really started to think about the pattern of success that I had had in my career, and then decided, well, heck, I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a full-time employee, I love learning, I should absolutely go back to school and then pursue a doctorate degree in higher ed. So that's just a little bit about who I am and how I ended up here today, and then started working at Strada, where my responsibilities primarily are in organizational communications, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and outreach. So thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me just to share a little bit around how autobiography is theory, and then we'll just apply some of those notions along the way. So one thing that, as I begin to think about everything that we're talking about today, that you learned yesterday about the value of a post-secondary education credential, whether it's from a 2-year, a 4-year, or a technical program, and then also thinking about purposeful pathways to employment. One thing that was really interesting in a work shift article that came out earlier this year, it talked about as higher education works to enroll more first generation, underrepresented minority, and Pell eligible students, economic mobility has become a critical justice issue for institutions. So then I start to think about, what does this mean to really think about higher education as a critical social justice issue. And that's when, again, as I was preparing remarks, started really thinking about, is there a continuum for someone who is an ally for higher education and access and completion? What does it mean to be an advocate to make sure that students persist and complete and seek gainful employment or post collegiate opportunities, whether it's graduate school or entering into the workforce or becoming an entrepreneur? And then what does it mean to be an accomplice? And traditionally, when you think about the word accomplice, oftentimes it's a negative connotation because it's usually at the scene of a crime. But when I started really kind of swimming in the idea of an accomplice in the work that we do, is really thinking about, what does it mean for that next level commitment to disrupt patterns and to make sure that our students get everything that we want them to get. So then here we are today when we really start working on and thinking through. And I absolutely love what the commission put together. Every student deserves the opportunity to pursue a fulfilling career, and Indiana graduates should expect that the degree or credentials they earn will prepare them for meaningful employment and career advancement. And I thought, what better way to really kind of dive into our conversation today and really think through, what does this mean from the ally end of the spectrum to becoming an accomplice? And really wanting to think through the work that everyone does on campus and the work that you want to do once you leave this wonderful conference. And then I want to pause here. Liz, I know you're on the phone. I believe, and I'm hoping you have administrator rights to do this, I think that I have my video off, and I'm wondering if you can turn that on for me as I go through the presentation so that folks can actually see my face while I present. If you could do that.
Let me see if I can.
Okay.
If you have the buttons at the top of your screen, they may help you do that as well. You should
Okay.
have an audio and then a screen share and then a camera option.
Okay. So this may absolutely be user error right now, because I can see my screen and I have folks saying, we can't see you, Shantae. So this looks like a user error.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't have the on my side rights
Okay.
to grant that for you.
Okay. So we'll take a quick detour really fast. There we go.
There we go. We see you.
There we go. All right. So let's get back to our.
We enjoy seeing your face, so that was worth the pause.
Okay, there we go. Oh boy. Technology, technology, technology. Okay, there we have it. So,
Oh, we don't see your slides yet.
Okay, great. So it feels really weird just to speak to the slides and at least I want everybody to at least see the face of who you're talking with and sharing space with today. So, hello, I'm Shantae. You had an opportunity to kind of hear that background for talking about autobiography is theory. And one thing at Strada, we've really been spending time thinking about the question, what does beyond completion mean today? What does beyond completion mean for all students, and how might we help them succeed given the work that we do as a social impact organization, the partnerships that we have with several institutions here today on the call, and then also really walking through some of the data that we have from our public viewpoint research team. And so, quick disclaimer, while I finished a doctorate degree, I do not work in the research department. So when you have questions, I'll do my best to answer it about the data. If not, you can definitely follow us Strada Education Network. We are on LinkedIn, Twitter, and that our researchers are more than happy to also engage when you have questions after this conversation. So let's jump back into the call and then really start to walk through now the start line. So I'm going to switch back and then get to the presentation for everyone. And let's jump back in. So we spend a lot of time, and I know there are a lot of higher ed theorists and doctors of higher education on the call today. And so we really started initially at Strada talking about the old finish line and the new finish line. And so I was really interested in thinking through, like, let's talk about the start line. And so when we start really thinking back to the role of access and getting students to college and, yes, getting through college, one thing that really I enjoy about working in college sports and working in that particular sector in higher ed, and what I really love about a good race and a marathon in the start line, and in particular, what I love about sprinting and some of the 200, the 400, 1600 yard dash is that you know that there's 8 individuals, 6 to 8 individuals on the track. They look different. They come from different experiences. They are approaching the start line from a myriad of different backgrounds. And so the one thing that we do, and that we're not going to have a lot of time to unpack today, is just really about that runway to get us to the start line. But when I started thinking about, okay, the start line and thinking about access, that truly is kind of that level one about being an ally. I want to do what I can do to support students to get to school, whether it's enrollment management, financial aid, being a registrar, serving as that advisor, but really thinking through what that meant to have the President's Commission on Higher Ed in 1947, and really thinking about the vision that the Truman Commission had, which was about really having an expansive, inclusive, and diverse system of post-secondary education in the United States. And so, that appeared just as a lot of veterans were coming back into the marketplace, and they really started thinking through with the GI Bill, pouring into the nation's campuses, and then just taking advantage of the program to provide tuition. That was the genesis of Strada Education's work back when it was is really thinking about that access component. Now, as we begin to transition and think about the old finish line around completion, right around the, I don't know, probably the 2000s or so, post-secondary education and training stakeholders began to advance their focus around beyond college access to completion. And so the UNCF talks about kind of getting to and through college. And here's what we know on the phone in thinking about our role around being an advocate is that the undergraduate degree really remains the surest path to economic mobility, employment stability, and a host of other social benefits. We know this is true for first-gen students, those who struggle to afford education, and also for some students of color, especially for students of color. Yet a lot of current and prospective students from the walks of life and stages of life are increasingly questioning whether that credential, that bachelor's degree, is going to be worth the time, effort, and money. So what I'd like to do is share a couple of points from Strada Education Network's alumni survey that was released this past October. So when looking at the question, and what we've pointed out is that alumni have had many motivations for pursuing education. And so if we look at it through the lens of career, being able to qualify for good jobs, gaining skills to be successful at work, advancing in the career, being able to support myself and my family, make more money, so that financial vertical. And then on the personal side is being able to learn new things, become the best person I could be, and be a good role model. So alumni had many motivations for pursuing education. And as you can see, when we look at the dark blue, it's extremely or very important reason for pursuing education. And then when you look at the lighter blue column, where you see just a slight difference, is that these alumni said that these outcomes, that they strongly agreed that the education helped with that outcome. So then when we take a look at the data and look at it through the lens of our different demographics, one thing that our researchers discovered is that Black alumni are less likely to feel that their goals were met. So we're looking at being able to qualify for good jobs, to gain skills to be successful in work, advance in my career, be able to support myself and family, make more money, learn new things is very high. So those goals are being able to learn new things and exposure, becoming the best person that I could be, and becoming a role model. And when we looked at the demographics and break it down to Latinx, Asian, and Indigenous students, there wasn't a great significant difference between those and white alumni, so we weren't able to produce that slice of data. But when we looked at the Black alumni, that they are less likely to feel that their goals were met. And so what we discovered with this particular data point, colleges aren't meeting the needs of students of color. And so when we hear from our alum that there are just large racial disparities to the extent of which alumni say that education fulfilled their aspirations. And then we know as advocates, we're working very hard to get students to and through college. But then the next question becomes, what do we do holistically to ensure that we can really begin to address the disparities? And so such disparities signal that the equity imperative must extend beyond completion of a degree or credential to ensure that all graduates are able to realize the full benefits of education. So compared to first-year students' expectations, seniors were typically half as likely to complete career preparation experiences. So again, when we start thinking about social capital building, being able to network with alumni or a professional, interview or shadow, discuss career with a faculty member, the plans to do so as a first year, 70% have plans to network with alumni, 77% have plans to interview or shadow in their career, 79% to discuss career with a faculty member. And then when we look at what actually happened in interviewing seniors and their completed activity, we see a significant decrease in the actual happenstance of did they engage in that particular activity. And when I think about social capital and the importance of that, and that was an area that I looked at in my dissertation about what makes African American women successful in higher ed, one of the things in executive roles, one of the things that came out in my research was the difference around social capital, and in particular, the 4 different types of relationships that one has throughout their career. But then when you look at general career building activities, meeting with career services staff, mock interviews, use of resources from career services, help with resume, and some of the traditional supports that go on when we're thinking about that beyond completion question, you'll see again that there is a nice gap and talking point from the first year intention all the way down to what the students actually decided to do when they were on campus. So another thing that we've learned at Strada, and you all have heard many times before, is social capital building is associated with stronger career planning outcomes. And that goes down to what are you learning at this institution that it's relevant to your career plans. You can describe the knowledge, skills, and experiences necessary for careers, that you have a clear idea of career plans, and you know where you want to go with questions about your career plans to further education. And then the experience at this institution has helped clarify those career plans, and that you've received supportive feedback. And so you'll notice again with this particular data point, there's definitely a difference of those where they have a lack of participation, where they have that general career building activities, and then what that means when you're pairing social capital activities with general career building activities. The other thing that we found is seniors have less confidence in their networking abilities. So how much confidence do you have in your ability to do the following? So then we look at this: work effectively with people of other backgrounds. Okay, there's confidence in being able to do that. All the way down from effective work habits, addressing ethical issues that you may face in your career. Communicate your knowledge, skills, and experiences to potential employers and using career-specific technology. Again, what we find here is that around confidence and the experience around networking with alumni or professionals to make potential career connections. And most of us on this call understand that often your first great job or that next promotion has a lot to do with the social capital that you build early in your career as an emerging professional, and even those that are on that professional track and executive track. Relationships and social capital matter. So I'm curious, and I'd love for you all just to put a couple of, let's engage via the chat, but I'm really interested. How does your campus community define social capital? And then how do you introduce that value to students? What works? So I would love to be able to see a couple of those best practices show up in our chat, and really begin to identify. I really want to get a good idea. Let's take about, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes just to generate conversation around that, around social capital. What are you doing on campus? How are you talking about the value of social capital on campus? And how are you introducing that to students? And then I also see that we have one question in the chat around if we have our finger on the pulse when it comes to younger generations. Okay, we'll definitely try to get to that point as well. We have, with Strada Education Network, we have looked at the equation around recent graduates with some of our studies and report, and I can get that to you, Brenda. So I'll definitely make sure that we follow up and get that information to you. So if I can, as you all are thinking about some of those best practices, would love to see that in the chat around social capital. What are you doing and what works? Especially knowing that that is it's a differentiator for our students and what we're doing to support. Okay, so we'll dive back into the presentation. Okay, so we talked about the starting line and we talked about access. And so we want to go back into thinking about this new finish line and what does it mean to be an accomplice. So with some of the work that we're doing at Strada, really start to think about that new finish line around employment opportunities, employment outcomes, economic gains, and meaningful work and fulfilling lives. And so in the mid 2000s, that's right when post secondary education started really thinking about shifting their focus beyond access to completion, and then really started talking about that completion agenda. And as Keeping Up, Strada wanted to make sure that we're doing the same thing. So let's talk a little bit about a framework for measuring post-secondary success. We're looking at an income over $40,000 annually. Is it worth the cost? And then what are those achieved goals? So a framework for measuring post-secondary success: income, value, and purpose. So around achieving goals. As we begin to really dive into this framework around what does it mean and what does beyond completion mean today, what are the goals that you set out? What is that life plan that students are wanting to talk through and think about? So more than just graduating, but what are those aspirations that you want to have? The value of that education and the income. So we have been talking a lot, and I know there was conversations around what does it mean to add that workplace credential onto a program? What does it mean to make sure that we're talking about different areas around career? And then what are some of those careers that will get you to a place where we're improving and working toward economic mobility? So when we think about those three things, it's right around 52% of those surveyed in Strada's recent public viewpoint that said that they've accomplished all three. When you look back at the alumni that were surveyed, 52% of those surveyed said that they were able to accomplish all three: the goals, the value of the education, and that income level. And so we've also discovered that outcomes after graduation, that they're not equitable. So when we look at students of color compared to white students, we see a decrease of around 10 percentage points. Was it worth the cost? A decrease around 9%, and around achieving goals, decrease of 6%. When we take a look at that first generation students compared to students who are not first generation, we see a decrease of around 13%. Worth the cost, negative 6%, a decrease in 8% for achieved goals. And then when we look at female students compared to male students, you're seeing it's kind of similar around the board, but 11 to 10%. So we see a decrease when we look at the outcomes after graduation, that they're not equitable. And so our challenge when we think this through is about only 1 in 4 adults completes a post-high school credential that delivers results beyond completion. Only about 1 in 4 adults complete a post-high school credential that delivers results beyond completion. And then when we think about success beyond completion, 1 in 4 adults complete a post-high school credential that delivers results beyond completion. So first generation students and students of color are even less likely to complete credentials that deliver success beyond completion. And here's where the charge for us to really begin to think through: how might I be an accomplice to ensure that we are positioning our students and our learners to create credentials that deliver success beyond completion? And again, that's looking at income, the goals, and the value. And so there's a paradox and a loss of confidence that we're facing. So people are losing confidence in a credential or degree, but yet 98% of the jobs created after the recession require a credential after high school. And that we also have learned that social capital, social networking, those social capital supports are those that really help to make the difference once you're seeking that first job and throughout your career trajectory, connecting education to employment. So then what would increase your confidence in the value of an education? So we're looking at the clear connection between education and work. So I know that there was the conversation where we were able to hear the dialogue between higher ed and the workforce, in yesterday's opening session. So a clear connection between education and work. That would increase the confidence in the value of an education, guidance to choose and navigate a path. And then we probably would also say the understanding of what's needed in that runway for different student populations and the supports to succeed as a student, really incorporating the voice of that student to create more equitable outcomes beyond completion. So we believe that everyone deserves an education and that training helps them here at Strada. So we believe that everyone should have the opportunity to secure a good job, to do meaningful work, to contribute to their communities, and to lead a fulfilling life. And our goal is to help make this belief the norm. And so Strada has a unique combination of resources and expertise to make that change. So we think about how Strada engages in social impact and works in post-secondary education to employment. We'll start with the pillars. So there's the grants and the investments that we make with our partners. And then there's advocacy and engagement, sharing research via public viewpoint, meeting with policymakers, talking to influencers, incorporating the voices of students and practitioners in our work. Research, as we shared, there's the public viewpoint. Our next public viewpoint in January, in fact, is going to center around the idea of beyond completion and looking at pairing credentials and building that a stronger connection with social capital, credentials, and what does that mean beyond completion. And then there is our kind of boots on the ground Strada Collaborative, which is a collection of 4 different parts working in the education to employment sector. And then the effective practices that we really want to shine a light on, the things that we know work. And so how the pieces fit together, when we think about Strada's goals and the things that we're wanting our accomplices to join us in, is establishing outcomes beyond completion, innovating and identifying solutions, scaling solutions and advance adoption. And then for Strada, it's sustaining and supporting the vibrancy of our workforce. And so when we look at the programs and initiatives, looking at credentials and new models of learning, community college, the work that we do with community colleges, higher ed, the conversation that all of us are having, and then most recently an engagement that we had with historically Black colleges and universities. One thing that we know with HBCUs as an institution type are as an institution type, really leading the way in increasing economic mobility and degree attainment for Black students and the students that they serve. And then really, really tying it together with the practices that work, guidance, education and work connections, and resources. So I walked through kind of how the pieces fit together with Strada. When we think about opportunities with Google, the Grow with Google certificates, and know that there are colleagues from Purdue University on this call that have recently announced a wonderful partnership with Grow with Google. But it's also really thinking about how the stackable credentials are making a difference in ensuring that we're talking about those effective practices. We know that the World Economic Forum has estimated that 50% of all employees will need reskilling. And in part, that's due to technical skills. So we know that the Google Career Certificates will help people gain job-ready programs. There's been a lot of conversation about those students and also those students of color, in particular working in or obtaining degrees in liberal arts. So how might we pair those two? So really thinking about being an accomplice and how do we fit the pieces together with programs like Grow with Google. With our Insight Track, part of our Strada Collaborative, and providing that coaching. We know that coaching paired with advising Success coaching is a best practice. So how do we extend the reach and build capacity for coaching when we're looking at access completion and really thinking about what does that mean beyond completion and getting to that more purposeful place, life after college, and connecting better with employment. We also know that work-based learning at scale, critical in what we're doing in higher ed, connecting education and work. Strada Education Network works with a program called EAW. It's one of our collaborating organizations where they take students and they're able to pair them with companies in the financial and the tech industry where their first job, where they're able to build the capital that they need, both socially and financially, to really think through what are those outcomes beyond completion. And then through our grants and investment work. And so looking at companies and supports like Brave and those educational partnerships that we have an opportunity to engage in. When we measure progress, a couple of things come to mind is that we want to make sure that we're looking at equitable success and persistence in completion and in employment outcomes and in socioeconomic outcomes. And we want to look at all of the different wraparound support from Strada's perspective, as well as for those on campus, but really thinking through how might we really begin to disrupt and innovate, partner and pair so that we can ensure equitable success and persistent completion, employment outcomes, and socioeconomic outcomes. So the co-conspirator mindset, it goes back to the original reason of why we're here. Every student deserves the opportunity to pursue a fulfilling career, and Indiana graduates should expect that the degree or credentials will earn or will prepare them for meaningful employment and career advancement. And that co-conspirator mindset is moving beyond that accomplice and saying that this is what we are doing to conspire to make sure that all of our students in Indiana are receiving and deserve the opportunity for the fulfilling career, getting the degree and credential that they will earn that'll prepare them for a meaningful employment life and career advancement. And that's when I think about the reason why I came back to higher ed. It's to make sure that this happens. So when we think through the accomplished mindset, completing a degree or completing a degree or training program, it's no longer good enough. We need to transform education and training after high school. We've shared with a couple of data points that students want and deserve success beyond completion, and that they really want to work for a good job, meaningful work, and the ability to contribute to their communities and lead a meaningful life. So I would love for you all to join in, and you're doing an amazing job as becoming and working as a student advocate. But what I'd like for us to do now is take on the challenge, think about those practices and helping students to really understand the value of social capital, work experiences and balance, and then really start to think through not only how do I become an ally, continue the work as an advocate, work toward being an accomplice. And then what I think is our big, hairy, audacious goal is being that co-conspirator in making sure that we have helped all students succeed beyond completion with increased employment, that they've met their goals, and that there is value in that degree and credential. So I really would love to thank everyone for listening to a little bit of what Strada Education has to say. And I understand that the next session starts at 10 o'clock. And then also want to make sure that I follow up, Brenda, with you and looking at the question that you have with some of our research around what happened with recent graduates. So I want to thank everyone for today's session. It's been a joy to be part of your day as you're planning the rest of your learning agenda. And please make sure that you follow us at Strada Education Network, that you join us for our public viewpoint webinars. You'll find that it's very practitioner-based, filled with data, and it's also on our homepage of our website at Strada Education Network. So I want to encourage you to log on, join, follow, and be part of the convening and help us answer that question of what does it mean to move beyond completion and to really be a co-conspirator to help our students have more equitable outcomes in post-secondary education. So I'd like to thank you. Have a wonderful day. And Liz, thank you for having Strada.
Of course. Thank you so much for being with us. It was great to hear from you. And I'm so glad we're recording all these sessions because I'm going to go back and reference this one, certainly. For those that are tuning in, again, thank you for being with us today. All you have to do is navigate away from this session, just close it out. And at 10 o'clock, we have a number of breakout sessions for you to view. Again, Shantae, thank you so much for being with us. Loved your slide, loved your comments this morning. And I was looking through the chat, don't have any other questions for you. So I think I think we can close out. But again, thank you. And we'll see you all at 10 o'clock in the breakout sessions. Thank you.
Thank you.